So now we are going to discuss mechanisms of speciation. There are two forms. We have allopatric. New species is from populations that are geographically isolated from one another. And then we have sympatric, which is the formation of a new species from populations that actually live in the same geographic region. So allopatric speciation, these two little chipmunks are an excellent example. They used to live together. Now there's the Grand Canyon. It separated two populations of the organisms. They now evolved into two separate species. They cannot mate with one another and produce fertile offspring. And bluntly, no chipmunk is going to cross the Grand Canyon for the love of its life. Okay. Now, sometimes you can have situations where there's a geographic barrier and yet afterwards the populations are capable of interbreeding and no speciation occurs, and then other times you have reproductive isolation because speciation has occurred. Reproductive barriers may evolve as populations diverge. For example, in fruit flies, you can show evolutionary changes basically on the food source that is provided to them. Okay, that if you have starch given to some fruit flies, maltose given to other fruit flies, eventually you get two different species of fruit flies. And you have to keep in mind a fruit fly population is only 2 weeks long. So it's very easy to see speciation within an organism that has such a quick reproductive time. Sympatric speciation, this happens a lot in plants. Plants can much more easily than animals adapt to having too many chromosomes. So multiplication in the chromosome number of errors during the cell division results in an extra set of chromosomes. So if you're sitting here bored, this is what you can do. You take a banana and you cut like a cross section across the top. You put it on your tongue. You push it against the roof of your mouth. The banana will split into 3 parts because there are 3 sets of each chromosome, and each part of the banana is made actually by one set of them. Okay. You can get interesting little things like we have the zorse here, which is a zebra and a horse, and you do have this little zorse that exists. I do not remember off the top of my head. I do not believe the zorse is fertile, just like a liger or a tylon, right? A liger or a tyon, I think they call it. And one is if the mother is a tiger and the other is if the father is a tiger, and I'm not remembering the difference right now. But you can get this that happens. And then you can see my little Dutch iris over here on the right. You actually have doubling of DNA, but you can get a new species of plant that way. Adaptive radiation occurs in new or newly vacated habitats. So you can get many species from a common ancestor. This happens when we have mass extinctions or colonizations. Island chains provide excellent examples of adaptive radiation as a species moves from one island to the next and back and forth. Your Galapagos finches are an excellent example of this. Your mass extinction, the fall of the dinosaurs, the rise of mammals, there was huge adaptive radiation at that point. Now, we have two concepts as to the theory of the tempo of speciation. We have gradualism versus punctuated equilibrium. So gradualism simply says that you have small changes that are brought about by natural selection, and therefore you have multiple intermediates. Punctuated equilibrium is drawing on the fossil record. We look at that species diverge in spurts of relatively rapid change instead of this sort of slow and steady wins the race concept. Keep in mind that it's probably a combination of the two. Our fossil record is incomplete, and therefore we are not going to necessarily see every intermediate. Evolutionary trends reflect species selection. Keep in mind it's not goal-directed. It's simply looking at, what traits happen to be more favorable. So this is what happens. You get unequal survival. If you look into human evolutionary history, if we look at the fossil record, there are many, many different Homo species, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalis. We actually have DNA evidence that Homo sapien and Homo neanderthalis did actually interbreed. We believe that Homo neanderthalis went extinct because the animals that they hunted went extinct, not because of lack of intelligence, which is often a common misconception with them. Then we look at macroevolution. Okay, macroevolution is closely tied to Earth's history. We've seen this cute little chart on the last presentation that I gave, and the fossil record is actually an archive of macroevolution. Fossilization, again, most are casts of plants or animals. They're not the actual remains. Tissues decay, it becomes rock, and then the hard parts of the animals are replaced with minerals. Iron, pyrite, and silica are generally the most common of them. And then you have this new fossil that is formed. Trace fossils, this is worm burrows, dinosaur footprints, leaf imprints, things like that. Okay, we sort of went over this already. It's just a repeat of it. Determining age of fossils. So we have relative age. Relative age is determined by the position of fossils within sedimentary rock. So I'll do this with you. It works really well with the 6th graders. And I know it's sort of silly, but relative age is that I am the second youngest member of the 6th grade team. Okay, absolute age is I was born in 1980 and therefore I'm 40 years old. Okay, relative doesn't give me an exact age, but it lets me know if it's older or younger than something else, whereas absolute age is determined with radioactive isotopes, and then we can actually determine the true age of it. Those of you who took earth science, you did this in earth science. Okay, so relative dating is shown on the left, simply this younger versus older concept, whereas numerical dating or absolute dating is shown on the right as to whether, the actual age of rock layers. And we use carbon-14 in order to do this. Carbon-14 has a very long half-life, and therefore we can go back hugely in geological time. Okay, and this is just an example of carbon-14. So the half-life is 5,600 years is one half-life of carbon-14. Continents are not locked in place. We know this. They drift about the surface. We know the whole concept of the theory of plate tectonics. You guys first learned it in 6th grade with me. You did a little bit more with Mr. Jordan. You did a little bit more with Mr. Rothrock. Okay, we have this idea about 250 million years ago, supercontinent entitled Pangaea, because it meant all Earth or all land. Many extinctions occurred, which allowed for diversity. About 180 million years ago, Pangaea began to break up, which started causing geographic isolation, which is why you find a lot of real funky things in Australia. The fossil record reveals an episodic history. We have long, relatively stable periods of time with briefer intervals of mass turnover. Extinction is inevitable. However, extinction rates are not consistent. There have been periods of time where they've been much greater. And extinctions are followed by explosive diversification. Mammals were around when the dinosaurs were around. Mammals did not rule the earth until the mass extinction of the dinosaurs. This whole idea when I was growing up, it was big. Was it the volcanoes? Was it the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs? We actually think it's a combination of the two. There actually is a very massive crater off the Yucatan Peninsula that is radioactively dated to this time period, but we also see a prevalence of volcanic ash in those in the fossils of the time and the rock layers of the time, which is an indication that both contributed to the mass extinction of the dinosaurs. And that is that.